It may just be the toughest position in football, cornerback position, with the passing game thriving in college football, and especially with the quarterbacks that we ran down in the ACC. They are some of the best in college football, about 7 or 8 deep, extremely good quarterbacks. So these cornerbacks are going to be tested against passing offenses in the ACC this season. Let's check out the 5 best with Dan Rubin of BC Interruption. We've got Jeff Greenberg of Sports Glutton, and also from Shaking the Southland, Ryan Kantor. So, Jeff, we're going to start with you. Who are the best at corner position in the ACC this season?
I'm going to start in the 5 spot, and I've got 2 guys here because my top 4 I think I'm pretty confident in, and then there's a lot of guys I think that are ready to break out this year. 2 guys I'm keeping an eye on, and some of it's because I've seen them play the most, is out of NC State, Justin Burris, and out of North Carolina, Des Lawrence. I think both guys had really good years last year on a very difficult year from a defensive perspective for the Tar Heels. Des Lawrence was one of the bright spots, had a huge breakout game against Notre Dame on the road. And then for NC State, for a defense that struggled throughout the year, Burris was a guy also that was their, I think, consistent force in the defensive backfield. So one of those 2 guys I think is going to pick up that 5th spot in terms of top cornerbacks in the ACC. My 4th guy comes out of Clemson, and he's a youngster, but Mackenzie Alexander I think is one of those next made for the NFL talents to come out of Clemson. He had big games that I remember watching against South Carolina and Oklahoma, and he's just a solid guy all around that you want corner. And I think he's a phenomenal talent. I think he's someone we're going to hear a lot about last year. I have him at 4. He very well could go all the way near the top and try to be one of the or fight for the best cornerback position in the ACC. My 3rd guy is a question mark only because of coming off an injury in a position like cornerback, and he's coming off of leg injury. So that's one question mark, but his name's Brandon Facyson out of Virginia Tech. And I think what he's got going for him is he's on the opposite side of the field from another phenomenal talent in Fuller, and when you've got 2 great guys at cornerback, it makes the job a little easier for both. So I think Fayson's going to show what he was made of before he got injured, and I think the fact that he's on the other side of Fuller is only going to help his cause. The number 2 cornerback I have is out of Florida State, Jalen Ramsey, and I mean, honestly, I think you can take my number 1 and number 2 and flip-flop them all around, but I'm going to go with Ramsey at number 2 out of Florida State. Highly touted recruit, lived up to that billing so far, and I think right now the fact that he does everything. I mean, he's had 3 sacks, he's got interceptions, he's got pass breakups. For him, this is going to be the year where he needs to really step out and be the leader again because of who they lost on the defense, but I think he's up to the task. And I think you're going to hear a lot about Ramsey, and you're going to see him come up big in big games. And that leaves, as my number 1 cornerback in the ACC, again, another one I mentioned from Virginia Tech, Kendall Fuller, who comes from a great bloodline. Older brother Kyle was a first-round pick of the Bears, had a great season for the Bears. Fuller was just the guy that is the quintessential cornerback, the one that wants to take your best receiver and lock him down. He's not scared of the challenge. I think you can find him easily on the field because he's, again, in that cornerback mode. He's going to be the one that's talking a lot, waving his arms a lot, and wanting to take on all comers. I think he actually could be one of the best NFL prospects in the ACC, and I think between him and Ramsey, they're going to be fighting with Vernon Hargreaves from Florida as the top cornerbacks coming into the draft next year.
Right, Jeff, it's a good list. What I think is going to be interesting, aside from the other 2 videos that we shot, is I think we're going to mix it up with quite a few players here. I think there's a lot of talent at cornerback position in the ACC. So next we're going to go to Dan Rubin of BC Interruption. All right, Dan, your top 5.
You know, I'm going to actually follow a little bit of a trend that Jeff started because I'm also going to have 2 guys at my number 5 spot. One of which is Des Lawrence. Des Lawrence from North Carolina. That Notre Dame game was just phenomenal to watch if you were a fan of defensive football. But I also throw in the Pittsburgh game. He had 7 tackles against Pittsburgh, which was a very good individual performance. I think he wound up the year with something like 70-odd tackles. So he's going to be very good for that UNC defense this year. I put him alongside Jamal Golden, who's a senior at Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech wins a lot of football games, and when you look at how they do it, their offense does chew up a lot of time, and it does get a lot of the attention, but the defense does a very good job of making plays when it has to. Golden, I believe, is a senior this year. Good old-fashioned experience and smarts, and when you're old and you're deep, it's something that every coach kind of wants to be. So I put him alongside Lawrence from North Carolina. My number 4 cornerback, I put Brandon Facyson from Virginia Tech. I feel he could be a number 1 defensive back on the team. He obviously won't be because of Kendall Fuller. But at the same time, I also feel that he maybe loses a step because of the injury that he's coming back from. Anytime you have a guy coming back from an injury, you hate to say it about the guy because you want him to make the full recovery. You never want an injury to delay any type of development. But realistically, if he takes a step back with the way that the top elites are kind of stacking up, 4th is nothing to shake a stick at. For number 3, I put Mackenzie Alexander from Clemson. I think he's going to be outstanding this year. I think he is going to be a player that we're really going to have to take note of on a Clemson team that could potentially go compete for a national championship, the ACC championship, depending on when you have teams like Georgia Tech and Clemson, could wind up being like the old SEC title games with how good those teams are. And offense gets a lot of the attention, but a guy like Alexander is so talented for the Tigers. Number 2, I put Kendall Fuller from Virginia Tech. The pedigree is there, like was mentioned, with Kyle Fuller, the draft pick from Chicago. He's projected, Kendall, that is, to be also a first-round pick. Very good athlete. And my number 1 guy is Jalen Ramsey. Jalen Ramsey is moving over from what they refer to as the star defensive back. Not really a safety, not really a nickel back, but he kind of plays a rover back of sorts in that Florida State defense. The right guy is graduated. He's a returning All-American. It's his defensive backfield now. And I think when you have a guy who's that talented, who's going to be coming in and be able to play the game that he now wants to play in a defensive backfield that's going to be very, very talented, he could conceivably rocket his way up draft boards, up everything this year, and be considered as one of the best defensive players in the nation, not just in the defensive backfield.
All right, we've got a vote for Kendall Fuller. We've got one for Jalen Ramsey, and then we go to Ryan Kantor. Ryan, your top 5 in the ACC?
Yeah, well, Dan, I thought the Jamal Golden mention was a good one. He was very good last year. The only reason he falls just barely outside my top 5, Georgia Tech plays an offense that eats up time, and overall their defense was pretty bad. So while he was good, it's hard for me to get over that. So number 5, I went with Maurice Canady out of Virginia, a senior who had 3 interceptions last year, and he's on the first All-ACC team preseason for Phil Steele. Then at 4, Brandon Facyson, obviously coming off the injury, but we saw him in the first couple games. We saw him against Ohio State, so we saw what he can do. And if he makes a healthy recovery and he's playing at 100%, I think it's hard to argue against him in the top 4 or 5. And then the top 3 could really go either way at that point. You could kind of mix them up. But at number 3, I put Jalen Ramsey, only a sophomore, but his freshman year was outstanding. And watching him against Clemson was nothing but disheartening. At number 2, I went with Mackenzie Alexander from Clemson. He didn't have any interceptions last year, only had 22 tackles, but that's okay. It's because quarterbacks weren't passing to his receiver. In fact, they only passed to the receiver he was guarding 17.3% of the time. So while he may not have a lot of interception tackles, it's because he was such a shutdown corner, they couldn't even throw it to him. When they did, they only completed 35% of the passes to his receiver. And he only gave up 2 touchdowns, and none of them were in the last 9 games. So he improved as the year went on. He's a redshirt sophomore who a lot of us believe will leave early. Probably the best defensive player Clemson will have this year. And he's going to be extremely critical for that defense that's retooling on the defensive line. And the number 1, I did go with Kendall Fuller. He had 54 tackles, 2 interceptions, and on a Virginia Tech team that had a great defense and a bad offense, he was a superstar, and he's got another great cornerback across. That may be the best secondary between them, Florida State, and potentially Clemson, but more likely Virginia Tech, Florida State, phenomenal secondary. So I have Kendall Fuller as number 1 as well.
All right, good information there. Just to back you up on Canady out of Virginia, you mentioned the 3 interceptions. He started all 12 games for the Cavaliers. Number 2 in the ACC in pass breakups, and he was 3rd team All-ACC. You mentioned the first team selection coming into 2015. We also have an honorable mention possibility at Georgia Tech with DJ White. He saved the Georgia game in overtime. He had 66 tackles, 23 consecutive starts. He picked off 4 passes last season. And one of your guys, Jeff, Brian Walker, is a pretty good player, 38 tackles, 3 interceptions last season, coming into his junior season this year. So my top 5 looks similar to what you guys have there. I've got Brandon Facyson at number 5. Go back to his freshman season with 5 interceptions, stress fracture, missed all of last season. He's now got the medical red shirt with the extra season under his belt now. Only played 3 games last season. He should come back. We'll see if he's the same player coming up in 2015. I like the DJ White kid that I've mentioned at Georgia Tech at number 4. I've got Kendall Fuller on the other corner position at Virginia Tech. Over the last 2 years, he's got 8 interceptions. We know what the Fuller family brings. Kyle, a first-round pick, going to the Chicago Bears. Actually, Kendall had a wrist injury in 2014, which really limited him, made it difficult for him to break on the football, make some plays with his hands, and most of those interceptions were 2 years ago. So expect him at full health in his junior season to make big plays. Mackenzie Alexander, the sophomore. Ryan mentioned the limited stats, but very much outlined the explosion, the explosive play potential out of Mackenzie Alexander. He's a 5-star recruit. And my selection in all this is not just looking at 2014 and the production last fall. It's projecting how is this potential and athleticism going to produce this fall. And so I think Mackenzie Alexander is a guy that's really going to project as a big-time player, big playmaker for the Clemson Tigers this year, and I've got him rated at number 2. And then number 1, that leaves Jalen Ramsey. Dan outlined the position change because at Florida State, one of the few places where you have 2 kids move on to the NFL, and then you plug in possibly the best defensive back in the league to play cornerback. The next season with P.J. Williams and Ronald Darby gone. This kid really filled up the box score with 79 total tackles, 2 picks, 3 sacks, and 9 tackles for loss. So he really supported the run in that star position last season with 23 starts in his first 2 years in Tallahassee. Good list there, gentlemen. In looking at your particular schools, BC, North Carolina, and Clemson, is there anybody else that you're excited about that maybe we're not going to talk about necessarily this fall as being a star player in the ACC, but there is so much talent that comes into this league in the defensive backfield. Is there anybody that you're excited about maybe this fall, but maybe we won't see them on the radar until 2016? Anybody for you, Dan?
Yeah, a couple guys. At Boston College, they're really going to have to cover up by graduation. Manny Esprit is gone. He's been a 4-year starter for them and was really a tremendous addition to the team. He maybe wasn't the best athlete in the ACC. If you had taken him off Boston College and put him on any other roster, I don't even think he'd be one of the top 2 cornerbacks. But there's a hole that's created with his leaving. Isaac Yadom is most likely going to fill that role, at least to start. He played it sparingly last year as a freshman, so I don't necessarily think he'll be great this year. I think they're still going to be susceptible to the passing game, but we'll see how he improves over the course of the year. And the guy that I'm really excited about is defensive back who's a local product, Lucas Dennis, who is out of Everett High School in Massachusetts. Everett High School is the pipeline factory in Massachusetts that always seems to send 1 or 2 guys over to Boston College. I'm not even sure he'll play this year. He might spend the year as a redshirt, but he's a guy that's really going to have to be on the radar. If he does play or it does factor into the team this year, He most likely will be a guy that you see start out with 9 or 10 tackles his first year, work his way up through the depth chart as a nickel back, and then before you know it, he's a junior and he's your starting defensive back, and by the senior year, he's guarding the best of the rest of the league. Maybe doesn't project to the NFL. At least it's hard to tell. He isn't even on campus yet. Hey, Boston College makes a living out of taking guys who aren't projecting to the NFL and doing something with them. So we'll see what Don Brown can dial up with the hair on fire defense.
Yeah, and that's winning 7 games and getting to bowl games the last 2 years after that 2-win season a couple of years back. Guys, not to put you on the spot, but is there anybody that you're excited about for future seasons?
Yeah, I'll add, last year we had Gary Peters, who was a senior at cornerback. He played opposite Mackenzie Alexander, and he surprised us and was just phenomenal. I don't know if we'll have that this year. We may be starting Adrian Baker, a sophomore, opposite Alexander. But J-Ron Curse is a junior safety, who I think could be one of the best players on our defense and one of the best safeties in the ACC. Maybe a guy who goes to the NFL a year early. So not a cornerback, but another defensive back that I think is going to be key to Clemson's defense.
Okay, Jeff, I'm probably putting you more on the spot than anybody else because your defense gave up like 87 points per game last season. So I'm sorry.
Right.
I'll just throw it out there, Jeff. Anybody that you're looking at?
Yeah, but that's okay because you said we're looking forward, so that's perfect. In terms of player, I think big recruit coming in, 4 or 5-star guy out of New Bern, North Carolina that was a big in-state commit for Larry Fedora in Mike Hughes. And projected defensive back, but talk has already been rampant that he probably will see some action on offense as well. He's that type of athlete. So far, if you've talked to the coaches feel like he is the real deal. And, the other addition that we're going to have to look at that could make a big impact this year, if not next year, is the new defensive coordinator, Gene Chizik. I think he's going to have a big impact on how these players perform, how the defense does move forward, because it has to move forward. It's not very hard to move forward from what they performed like last year. So I think bringing him in is going to have a major effect on all the players on that side of the ball. And from talking to the leaders on that team, he's had that effect already. But Mike Hughes is going to be the one guy that I think he's going to like having in his defensive backfield in the next few years.
All right, good stuff, guys. You got us all set for watching the cornerback position again. One of the more difficult jobs in college football coming up this fall. Appreciate it.